Hi everybody, welcome back to another Stoneforge gaming video. Today we're going to be taking a look at how I carve sculptures or designs into styrofoam. Well, it's not actually styrofoam. This is actually extruded polystyrene. Styrofoam is actually a brand of styrofoam. But the first step in this process is actually to sketch out your design. Now, I'm going for sort of an old school Warhammer Dwarven Door sort of looking thing. And I'm going to be doing this freehand. Now, you could overlay tracing paper and if you print out some design or something like that, but the one thing you do want to be careful about is how much detail you actually put on here, because the process we're going to be doing actually does take quite a bit of it takes quite a bit of fine handling, and without or with too much detail it can be kind of hard. You might lose a bit here and there. So again, for me, I like to hand draw it with a marker, for one thing, because I know that by using a marker I'm going to create very thick lines that I'm not going to really lose that much detail when I go to hand carve it. You can see there on the right hand side I do have the tool that I'm going to be using, which is a router, not the router, it might be the router, from Hot Wire Foam Factory. And it's a hot wire foam tool that actually melts the foam as you use it. Now, the reason we're going to be doing this, you can see there our design right there is fully done. Kind of that old school dwarven door with all the runes and stuff on it. Now, the reason we're going to be using this rather than, say, a knife is because of the fact that yes, the outer edges you could do with a knife pretty easily. You can see here we're doing it at an angle, but the inner details, without using a lot of effort and carving at multiple angles, it would take 2 or 3 times as long, honestly, with doing it with a knife. Whereas if you use the very tip of this, you can kind of rock through it in a decent amount of time. So again, we're going to be carving at an angle outwards, and the idea here is that we're actually trying to make it look like it's fading out into a mountainside or a rock face or something like that, to where it will look like a naturally it will look like natural stone that has been carved to look like this. Because if you just go straight back, it will almost look fake. And you can do it. I've seen people that will do it. It just takes more effort. This way, you can kind of hide that seam a little bit better, and all in all, it will, I think, in the long run, bring a much better result. Now, this technique, the one nice thing about it is you can do so much. We're only doing one little thing here, which is this dwarven door, but you could do a dragon, like a dragon wall, like in Skyrim. You could do some giant elven eagle, something like that, some sort of big giant demon face or something, all sorts of stuff. The next step of this process is to use the very tip of this hot wire foam tool, and basically you're doing the same thing that you did with your marker, only you're using the tip of this tool. And again, what that does is that's melting on both sides and the center of that tip, so that we're actually getting a sort of a almost a bevel in there, and we're getting kind of a groove more than a bevel, really. And the reason we're doing that is because if you were to carve rock in, you'd be using a pick or something like that, and even if you smoothed it out, you would still have that sort of angle. Especially for something of this scale, it's very hard to make stone, but you can't like sand. Well, I guess you could now with some of the tools we have, but you can't really just sand down stone, at least from this time period, by hand. It just wouldn't have been feasible and would not have been realistic. So this will create a much more realistic sort of look, I think, overall, and we'll just create a very natural sort of, I don't know, aesthetic that I really have come to like. And again, we're just going around with all the details, just carving the nose out, and you're just kind of wanting to line it. You're not really pressing in. You're just letting the natural heat of the tool just do its work. You're not actually really even pressing. You're just barely touching it to the edge, and that allows us to create a deep enough ridge without it looking odd. Because if you press too far, I mean, heck, if you press too hard, you can shoot it right out the back of this thing and it'll look terrible. Unless you're trying to make a hole, which, again, you could do depending on what sort of design. If you're wanting to make a cave entrance or something like that, you definitely could do that. Now, the door here, you can see that I carved that out, and we're gonna have to put the runes back on because as I carved it, we lost some of that detail. Now, one of the interesting things I thought about after this is that you could actually make an insert into the base of the door, basically, and if you made it out of plastic and had the much thinner carved details, you could actually take that in and out, and then you could have it to where it looks, it would be an open dwarven door, or it could be closed depending on, depending on the games you're playing. If it's for like an RPG or a skirmish game where you're trying to get to the door and trying to get inside or something like that, that could be a cool scenario. But again, that all depends on how much work you actually want to put into this thing, because you would also have to magnetize it at that point. So again, we're just carving all these little lines here, and you can see that the door is, well, it's not exactly flat at this point, but we can do something to help that out just a little bit. Now, this next step of the process is going to be to take your sanding, well, it's a sheet of sandpaper, and you're going to kind of just, again, trace along those lines, and what that's going to do is it's going to kind of smooth out our edges a little bit to where we had some very sharp edges from the tool, because as I say, it melted. So what the sanding process is going to do is going to make those edges look much more smooth and much more natural, rather than being very, very stark. And again, this is all based on aesthetic and what you kind of like the look of, but overall this is kind of what I've always liked. Now you can see that here I am pressing with my fingers in on some of the pieces, just to kind of indent, and you can see like the dwarf's face is actually in a little bit further than the actual helmet, and again, this is to create some difference, and basically this is to create some visual interest on the piece, so when you go to dry brush it, it will actually the dry brush will pick up differently on different spots, which is kind of nice. And again, we're doing the same thing for the beard and for the door, so that we're getting flatter, more rounded edges, and again, it's all just to help that transition, and you can see that right there. The door, again, if you do this process on the door, it will actually help flatten that out a little bit more, and so when we do the dry brushing process, you won't pick up a bunch of jagged edges on that door, even though they are there because they're compressed. Here is the door after it has been painted. Again, you could paint this in any sort of paint scheme. I just did a basic gray to white dry brush scheme just real quick, just to kind of show you guys what you could do with very, very basic details and very basic color scheme. But you could do a lot of different stuff with this technique. Thank you all for watching this Stoneforge gaming video, and I will be back with another one.